The last few fight nights have been a little bit of a grind to get through, but it is finally all worth it because it is UFC 300 fight week. On paper, the best card of all time. You have a stacked main card. The prelims are absolutely absurd. There's not a single bad fight on this entire card. You have two former champions as the curtain jerker. So really just a fantastic card here for UFC 300. And that means I'm going to be going through and giving my picks for every single fight on this card. I want to know your guys' thoughts. What fighters do you agree on, disagree on? Timestamps are going to be down below if you're just looking for a specific matchup. But let's just dive right into it, and we're going to start off with that curtain jerker, Deiveson Figueiredo taking on Cody Garbrandt. This has got to be like the best opening fight on a card, ever in UFC history. And just looking at this matchup here, I don't love it for Cody Garbrandt. He's taken a step back in his competition over his last two fights. He had a decision win over Trevin Jones and then a knockout win over Brian Kelleher, so he was kind of stepping back outside the top 15, but man, they're throwing him right back into the fire here against Deiveson Figueiredo. He had a great bantamweight debut against Rob Font. The power definitely translated. He hurt Rob Font multiple times. He looked good. His counters were impressive. They were sharp. I think both these guys have the power to put each other out, but I just think Deiveson Figueiredo has proven to be much more durable throughout his career. He only has one knockout loss, and that was by a doctor stoppage against Brandon Moreno. So even though Cody Garbrandt is super powerful, he could hurt Deiveson Figueiredo. I have a hard time seeing Figgy not kind of finishing Garbrandt early on in this fight. So my prediction is going to be a round one Figgy knockout. Maybe round two, I could see him coming out kind of patient, wanting to conserve his energy, but my official pick is going to be a Deiveson Figueiredo round one knockout. Hopefully we get a nice war between these two, but I just don't know if Cody's going to be durable enough to withstand Deiveson Figueiredo. Now, the next fight, we have Bobby Green taking on Jim Miller, and I do think this fight is kind of closer than the odds suggest. I think Bobby Green is close to a 2-1 favorite, maybe larger than a 2-1 favorite, but I feel like Jim Miller is viewed as like this super old fighter. He's like this, old veteran going up against not a super young Bobby Green, but both these guys are honestly getting up there in age. Jim Miller's at 40, which is definitely old, but Green's getting up there also at 37. You'd think just skill for skill that Bobby Green would be able to pick apart Jim Miller on the feet. We know he's super elusive, has a super unique style, and even though Bobby doesn't typically use his wrestling, he does have solid wrestling in his arsenal, so I do think he could kind of stuff the takedowns of Jim Miller. However, he does have the red flag of coming off a very, very vicious knockout. Remember the Jalin Turner fight where he got pretty much put out cold and then sustained like 10 to 20 just absolute massive follow-up shots when he was completely unconscious. Had to watch that fight back, that stoppage. It was honestly worse than I remember it, and I remember thinking it was pretty terrible. So that's not great, and it's not great that it happened. It was also only 4 months ago, so there is some concern there. Jim Miller's been on a tear. He's won 5 of his last 6. All 5 of those wins were by finish, and he has been showcasing some knockout power. So I do think this is a pretty competitive fight. If I was playing the betting line, I'd be betting on Jim Miller. But if I just have to pick a winner, I'm going to slightly lean towards Bobby Green to win by decision. But I do think this should be a pretty competitive fight. I really like the matchup for Jim Miller. They didn't try to feed him to some young up-and-comer. Just 2 veterans going out there to put on a scrap. I really like it. And Jim Miller needed to be on this card. UFC 100, 200, now UFC 300. Now pivoting over to Jessica Andrade taking on Marina Rodriguez. I think when we're looking at these two, Andrade is definitely the more dangerous, powerful woman, and Marina Rodriguez is the more technical fighter, the more technical striker. I think on paper, this is probably a good matchup for both of these women because when they've struggled in the strawweight division, it's been against top grapplers. This fight is very likely going to take place on the feet, so they're kind of both going to be operating where they're most comfortable, where they're most talented in. We have Jessica Andrade coming off a finish over Mackenzie Dern. Marina Rodriguez is coming off a finish over Michelle Waterson. I'm going to slightly lean towards Jessica Andrade here. I think it's going to be close. I'm going to go with Jessica Andrade by decision. I think she's going to be able to do enough damage. Maybe she hurts Marina in one round, hits her with a few big shots in another one. I think she's going to do just enough damage to kind of override the volume of Marina Rodriguez. I also think Jessica Andrade is live for a finish, but I'm going to slightly lean towards a decision here in this one. In the next fight, we're going to have Jalin Turner taking on Renato Moicano, and this really is just like a true clash of styles here. Jalin Turner is going to want to keep this one on the feet. Moicano is going to probably want and need to mix in the grappling, get his submission game going. We have Moicano coming off a tough win over Drew Dober, and then Jalin Turner's coming off that very gruesome Bobby Green finish that I just mentioned. So very impressive performance from Jalin Turner. Renato Moicano, it was a tough fight, but he got the win against a very tough and durable Drew Dober. Looking at Jalin Turner, he has definitely improved his takedown defense since he just was completely controlled on the ground against Matt Frevola in a loss in 2019. He was taken down 4 times by Mateusz Gamrot, but he really didn't let Gamrot get off any offense. He nullified any ground and pound, any submission attempts out of Mateusz Gamrot. And I do think when you watch that fight back, even though he was controlled for, chunks of that fight, I think based on damage, he has a pretty decent argument of winning. He didn't get it on the scorecards, but he was right in there. It's not like he was completely dominated on the ground by Mateusz Gamrot. So when looking at Renato Moicano, he has kind of struggled when he's fought the upper echelon strikers in both flyweight and lightweight. He hasn't fared super well. He's been knocked out by Rafael Fiziev, Korean Zombie. Jose Aldo was also outstruck by RDA, albeit that was short notice. And then he's also lost to Brian Ortega, but that was by submission in a pretty close back and forth fight, but both those guys were much younger. So my prediction here is going to be Jalin Turner, and I think he gets it done in round 1. Jalin Turner has not won a decision in his career, and he's also never been submitted. So I just think that Jalin Turner is a little more dangerous in the grappling and is going to be able to fend off those takedowns. I have more confidence in him doing that than I do with Renato Moicano going out there, standing up, and having some success with Jalin Turner on the feet. I really do think Turner's very impressive. He has a huge frame for this division, and I do think he gets it done by knockout. But either way, I really like both of these guys. Both very fun. Renato Moicano obviously has a super entertaining personality, so it would be fun to see him get a win, get a post-fight interview, but I am leaning towards Jalin Turner with this one. Now, in the next matchup, down in weight class, we have Sodiq Yuseff taking on Diego Lopes. This is honestly a really tough call for me. I know a lot of people are very in on Diego Lopes. They think he's kind of just going to cruise through this fight. He's always super fun to watch. I understand the appeal with him. He's also always live for a finish just based on his aggressiveness and his elite grappling. But man, Sodiq Yuseff is a very, very solid fighter. He's 6-2 in the UFC. His only losses have come to Arnold Allen and Edson Barboza. I really think highly of Arnold Allen, and same thing with Edson Barboza. He almost finished him, kind of maybe blew out the gas tank early on in that matchup, which led to him losing the 5-round decision, but he really has lost to just the best of the best. I think in a pure striking match, I'd probably favor Sodiq Yuseff, and I think that becomes interesting when we really look at Diego Lopes's past fights in the UFC, because the question here is he actually going to be able to get this fight to the ground? I think most would assume that that's his easiest path to victory here. And maybe surprising to some people, he has not landed a takedown in any of his 3 UFC fights or his Contender Series fight. All 4 of his opponents that he's had in the UFC and on the Contender Series have initiated the grappling in those matchups. So either they're shooting for takedowns, we saw it with Movsar Evloev, Joe Anderson Brito. I think Pat Sabatini was going for a takedown, and then that exchange led to him getting knocked out. And then you had the triangle armbar against, Gavin Tucker, where he was, trying to initiate the grappling. So we've seen people try to bring that to Diego Lopes. I really don't think Sodiq Yuseff is going to do that. I think he's too intelligent to try to implement that type of game plan. But Sodiq Yuseff also doesn't have the best takedown defense. So even though Diego Lopes isn't the most elite wrestler in terms of getting the opponent down to set up his submission game, Sodiq Yuseff also isn't great at stopping those takedowns. He's been taken down 9 times in his last 5 fights, and it's not like he's gone up against top-tier wrestlers. I think Edson Barboza took him down 3 times, so not a great look there. I'm going to lean slightly Diego Lopes by decision. I think it's going to be a very close, very competitive fight. I just think Diego Lopes is going to be competent enough on the feet, and he'll hang in there enough where if he can just win certain grappling exchanges, get some submission attempts off, I think he will get the edge with the judges. So I'm going to be going with Diego Lopes in this one. Now in the next matchup, we have the only fighter making their UFC debut on this card, Holly Holm taking on Kayla Harrison, who with her first fight in the UFC, and pretty much assuming that Kayla Harrison doesn't kill herself trying to make weight, it's really hard to pick against her in this matchup. I do believe she'll have the weight down. She's been nothing but a true professional. She has a great camp around her at ATT. If she signed the contract, I have confidence that she knows she's going to make it. I think she's very disciplined. I do think she will hit, the 136 number on the scale. And just looking at Kayla Harrison's wrestling, I just think it's on a different level in this matchup. Holly has not faced someone of that caliber. Holly Holm is also 3-3 in her last 6 fights. She's coming off a submission loss, which was overturned to a no contest because Mayra Bueno Silva tested positive, I think, for Ritalin. But, still got submitted in that one. She's 42 years old, and Kayla Harrison's probably still getting better at this point. I just think they're on kind of 2 different trajectories in their career. I'm going to be going with a Kayla Harrison round 2 sub. I think Kayla Harrison is going to get her down sometime in the first round. I think she's going to rack up some control time. I think she's going to repeat that in round 2, but I think Holly Holm's going to try to get aggressive, try to take a risk, get up, and I think she's going to get subbed by Kayla Harrison here. So I do think Kayla's going to get it done in her UFC debut. In the next fight, we have Calvin Kattar taking on Aljamain Sterling. This was one where I was going back and forth on for a while. It really was kind of feeling like a toss-up, but over the last couple of days, I'm feeling a little bit more confident in my pick here. We have Aljamain Sterling coming up from 135. We have Calvin Kattar returning from a knee injury after being out for 18 months. So there are some question marks on both sides just due to a new division for Aljo, a long layoff coming off an injury for Calvin Kattar, and then this is the pretty clear striker versus grappler matchup. I think what I really like about this fight for Aljamain Sterling is that it's 3 rounds. And I'm not saying that because Aljo doesn't have the cardio to go 5 rounds. We've seen him do that. The dude beats Henry Cejudo in a 5-round fight. His cardio is not bad. But Aljamain Sterling's not a guy who's going to land a super high percentage of his takedowns, but when he does land them, he can rack up, large amounts of control time. We saw that in the second Petr Yan fight, where he took him down only a few times, but once he gets him down, he takes the back, and he's pretty much banking those rounds. He's kind of like the exact opposite of Merab Dvalishvili, who's going to shoot a ton of takedowns. He may land a decent amount of them, but he's not going to be super heavy, top pressure, get in the back. It's more of just kind of to wear them out, mix it up with him on the feet. So they are kind of different, even though they're coming out of the same gym there. And I think in a 5-round fight, he has to be much more careful with his energy. If we remember back to that first Petr Yan fight, he really wasn't doing bad in the first 3 rounds, but he was fighting at such a crazy kind of spastic pace that he ended up getting tired, I think, in the 4th round, and then Petr Yan threw the knee. But in those first 3 rounds, he was having success, it was competitive, and he was still kind of fighting all over the place. I think at 145, with less of a weight cut, I think he should have better cardio, and I think in a 15-minute fight, he can put on a crazy pace, where even if he's not getting, takedown super consistently, he can just continue to shoot, reshoot, look for a ton of different opportunities, and kind of just create a nuisance situation for Calvin Kattar. I do think Kattar definitely has the power to hurt Aljo. He could catch him on the way in with an elbow, an uppercut. We saw that nasty uppercut elbow against Shane Burgos. But his last finish was in 2020. Who knows what the timing is going to look like on the feet after his long layoff. So I am going to lean towards Aljamain Sterling. I like the 3 rounds. I think he's going to put a pace on him. And I think Aljo is going to get this one done by decision. Now, the featured prelim is going to have former champion Jiri Prochazka taking on Aleksandar Rakic. And these are 2 fighters at light heavyweight with very, very different fighting styles. Rakic is incredibly patient. He's not trying to get into these wild dog fights. He wants it to be pretty calm, where he's kind of dictating the pace. Jiri Prochazka has no interest in getting in a super, technical back and forth battle. He's going to push forward. He's going to push his pace. He's going to come forward with a variety of very, very dangerous weapons, whether it's kicks, punches, elbows, knees. He's going to do it all. Rakic is coming off a knee injury and almost a 2-year layoff, so that's definitely something to consider here in this matchup. And I think when we just look back at Rakic's track record before he suffered the ACL injury, it's not giving me a ton of confidence. He had a split decision loss over to Volkan Ozdemir. He had decision wins over Thiago Santos and Anthony Smith, who I think at that point were both already kind of out of their prime. And then he blew his knee out in a 50-50 fight with Jan Blachowicz. So if this was a situation where Rakic was looking like a world beater, he was unbelievable, and he's coming off the injury. I think you could still expect him to be decent, but that's not really what we had seen. I think Jiri's going to come out here. I think he's going to take Rakic out of his comfort zone. I think he's going to push the pace. I think he's going to land some big shots in round 1, and I think he eventually gets it done in round 2, going Jiri Prochazka round 2 knockout. Now shifting over to the main card, I know it's controversial that Bo Nickal, Cody Brundage is on the main card. Personally, I really don't care. You're going to watch all the fights. Like, does it really matter? They get paid the same. More people are actually probably going to watch the featured prelim. But in this Bo Nickal, Cody Brundage fight, I don't think this one's going to be close. I think Bo Nickal's the truth. I do think he's going to be a future champion, but I also don't think he needs to force his way into top competition at this point. The dude's 5-0 as a pro. People want him to go take this huge leap into the top of the division, and I mean, I don't really get it. He can get a lot of experience, improve his record, and not take super high risks. He can also build up his paychecks, become more and more popular as a star, rack up some finishes. So I don't really hate this track he's on here going up against Cody Brundage. Brundage is primarily known as a wrestler, but it's kind of tough because he's been out-grappled in 4 of his 8 fights. He's been out-grappled by Nick Maximov, Rodolfo Vieira, Cedric Dumas, and then also Jacob Malkoun. Even though he won that fight by DQ, Malkoun was dominating him on the ground. So if Cody Brundage's strength is his wrestling, and he's getting out-wrestled by pretty much half of his opponents in the UFC, and now he's going up against Bo Nickal, whose wrestling is just so far superior to any of the guys I mentioned, Cody Brundage does have some power that's probably a right-hand chance where he could land a big shot coming in. We saw him put out Tresean Gore, but outside of that, I think Bo Nickal's going to run through him. I'm going to go with Bo Nickal round 1 sub. Could also very easily be a knockout, but I think Bo Nickal gets it done early, and I think he makes it look pretty easy here. In the next one, we're going to have Charles Oliveira taking on Arman Tsarukyan. You could make an argument that this is top 2, maybe at worst top 3 fight on this card, and I do think it's a tough call between these two. Arman has climbed to larger than a 2-1 betting favorite, which I think is interesting. I get the appeal on why he is the favorite here. He's been super dominant. He's coming off a very impressive knockout over Beneil Dariush. But outside of the Islam Makhachev loss, I think the same thing can be said for Charles Oliveira, and he's also coming off a knockout win over Beneil Dariush. Had the weird thing where he was booked for the title, had to cut, had to pull out, but his last win was against Beneil Dariush, his last fight. I think the big question mark in this matchup is going to be how Charles Oliveira's submission game fares against Arman Tsarukyan's wrestling. A big piece of Charles Oliveira's wins over Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje is the threat he had of his submission game. When they would hurt Charles Oliveira, they wanted no part of him on the ground. We noticed something different when he fought Islam Makhachev. When Makhachev hurt him, he had no problem following him down to the ground and finding a submission. I would assume that Arman's going to be in a similar boat here. I don't think he's going to have the same respect that Poirier and Gaethje did. We kind of saw a matchup in 2022 with, I guess, 2 kind of up-and-coming prospects. It was Arman Tsarukyan taking on Joel Alvarez. A lot of people really like Joel Alvarez. He's super big for the division, a super dangerous finisher. 16 of his 19 wins were by submission, and he pretty much had 0 takedown defense. So it was like if someone shoots on him, he's going to be jumping guillotine. He's going to be looking for some sort of submission. He's fine playing, the jiu-jitsu game on his back. Arman did not respect his jiu-jitsu, his finishing ability at all. He took him down and just brutalized him on the ground with ground and pound. Since that Alvarez fight, his wrestling hasn't necessarily been super devastating. He couldn't really get it going against Mateusz Gamrot. He controlled Damir Ismagulov, but didn't land a ton of damage. It was pretty much just racking up control time. He was effective with his wrestling against Joaquin Silva, but he also got hurt by Joaquin Silva on the feet, so not a super clean win over a guy that he was a massive favorite against. I just think the way the betting line is currently, it seems like Arman Tsarukyan is being treated like he's like the next Islam Makhachev, and I just don't know if he's proven that quite yet. It's possible he hurts Charles Oliveira on the feet and then jumps right down to the ground, dominates, finishes the fight, or just goes to his wrestling and racks up control time. Those are definitely ways he can win this fight. but I'm going to be going with a Charles Oliveira sub in round 1. This could happen on a takedown where he jumps guillotine. This could happen where he hurts. Arman Tsarukyan finds the finish, kind of like the Justin Gaethje fight where he hurt him, followed him down, and then found the rear naked choke. So I'm going to be going with a Charles Oliveira submission round 1, but I do think this is anyone's fight. Very, very close. But if I was betting that betting line, there's no shot I'm betting on Arman Tsarukyan as a larger than 2-1 favorite. Just with Oliveira's track record, his one loss as of late has been to Islam Makhachev. It's tough to ding him too much for that. So I will lean towards Oliveira, but it is very close. Now, in the BMF title fight, we have Justin Gaethje taking on Max Holloway. In my opinion, this is the best fight on this card, the most exciting fight on this card, and it seems like people are kind of counting out Max a little bit, and I don't really get it. I know Justin Gaethje is coming off an amazing knockout over Dustin Poirier. It was fantastic. There's no doubt about it. It was super shocking, too. I think people thought we were going to get this long war. Super competitive round 1, and then he just completely flatlines Dustin with that high kick. And Gaethje hits like a truck. His leg kicks are nasty. He really is a top-tier fighter at lightweight. But it's also not like his recent fights haven't been competitive. He's not completely, blowing through the competition. He had the win over Michael Chandler, who did actually find some success in round 1 before he kind of started fading and then kind of just wanted to get into a brawl in the 3rd round where he's like walking towards Gaethje with his hands down, acting like a psycho. But Chandler had some success, but Gaethje did put a lot of damage on him, won that fight pretty clearly. He got dropped bad by Charles Oliveira, finished in that title fight. He had a very competitive fight against Rafael Fiziev. Could have potentially gone either way. I think most people did score for Justin Gaethje, but it was very close, very competitive. And then he had round 1 against Poirier, which was close before he had the knockout. I just think in this matchup, Max Holloway is the more defensively responsible fighter, even though he doesn't get a ton of credit for it. And I think it's just because Alexander Volkanovski is so great. Like in those Volk fights, he is getting outlanded by Volk, which makes it seem like, he's not super defensively responsible. But if you look at the significant strike numbers of his non-Volkanovski fights, even as of late, Korean Zombie, Arnold Allen, Yair Rodriguez, Calvin Kattar, that one was insane. But he is very defensively responsible when he's not fighting Volk, who at that time is just, pretty much pound for pound number 1 in the world. I also think he's the more durable fighter. Even though he's coming up to 155, he's never been dropped. Even in that first fight with Dustin Poirier, he didn't get dropped. He did get hurt, but didn't end up going down. It also looks like he's bulked up, which is something we didn't really see in the first Poirier fight or the second Poirier fight up at 155, but he looks bigger, looks like he's going to be closer to the size of a 155er, and I think it'll be interesting to see if that improves his power. I think that's kind of another misconception for Max Holloway, is that he doesn't have power. And I think this is something that happened for both Volk and Max Holloway, where at the time they both had great chins. Volk's potentially has been cracked by Islam and then Ilya, but at the time they both had great chins, and so it made it seem like neither was super powerful, where it was just like they might hit plenty hard. It's just they're both very, very durable. We saw Max Holloway put out Korean Zombie. I know he kind of ran right into it, but still, Calvin Kattar's got a crazy chin. He kind of clipped Arnold Allen late in that fight, even though he was also coming in reckless. But I don't think Max Holloway is completely out of a potential finish. I do think he could do it. I'm sure that Justin Gaethje is going to be looking to target the legs in this matchup. We saw Volk have a lot of success with that in their first fight. Gaethje has absolutely nasty leg kicks, so I'm guessing he's going to be looking for that. I also just think limiting Max's mobility would be huge. He's a guy who can move. He has great cardio. You cut that down, he becomes a sit and duck out there for Gaethje. That would obviously not be great for Max. I think this fight's going to be close. I think it's going to be a war. I think it's going to be very competitive, but I'm going to lean Max Holloway by decision here. I think if Holloway can get through the first couple of rounds without taking a ton of damage, weather the storm, I think he's going to be able to pull away in the championship rounds. Like I also mentioned, I think he's live for a finish. I don't think this is a situation where Gaethje can knock him out or win a decision, but Holloway can only win a decision. I do think Holloway can put Gaethje out. Gaethje can be hurt. He can be finished. I also think, I've been seeing some clips. We saw it in the Dustin Poirier fight. When Poirier was throwing those high kicks, Gaethje was leaning right into him. We also got sparring footage from Corey Sandhagen kind of landing that same head kick on Justin Gaethje. So I think a knee up the middle, a head kick, he could find Gaethje's chin and he could put him out. But I am going to lean towards a decision, but I don't think it would be crazy for Max Holloway to get a stoppage win here by knockout. But I'm just very excited for that fight. It's going to be fun. I think it's going to be a war. Has fight of the night written all over it. Now, in the second to last fight, the co-main event, we have Zhang Weili taking on Yan Xiaonan. And my personal opinion is that there's only one active strawweight who can really challenge Zhang Weili. Unfortunately, I don't think that's Yan Xiaonan. I think it's Tatiana Suarez. Yan Xiaonan is a very good striker. She's coming off a knockout win over Jessica Andrade, which is very impressive. I mean, putting out Andrade the way she did, it was a great win for her. The problem here is that grappling is definitely her weakness. She was dominated by Carla Esparza in 2021. She did show some significant improvements against Mackenzie Dern just a year later, but Zhang Weili is a different animal. Mackenzie Dern has a great submission game, but her wrestling isn't great. Zhang Weili is just great everywhere. She absolutely destroyed Amanda Lemos in her last title defense, 288 strikes to 21, just absolutely dominant. She racked up nearly 15 minutes of control time, and I don't have much confidence that Yan Xiaonan has a better ground game than Amanda Lemos. If anything, I think Lemos is probably more dangerous because she has more submission skills than Yan Xiaonan. So I do think Weili is going to take her down. I think she's going to put it on her. I'm going to go with a Weili round 3 ground and pound finish. I just think she's going to wear her out and end up getting her out of there in the third. And now the final fight, the main event, we have Alex Pereira taking on Jamahal Hill. I love this fight because it seems like either dude has a decent shot of winning. They can both knock each other out. Jamahal Hill does seem intent on making this fight kind of as hard as possible for him. He's talked about how he's not going to wrestle. He doesn't want to get in there, clinch, take Alex Pereira down. He wants to knock him out on the feet. And could he knock him out on the feet? Yeah, he definitely could. He's super powerful. We've seen what he did to Johnny Walker. I mean, he beat the crap out of Glover Teixeira. Couldn't finish him, but put a lot of damage on him. But there's no way around it. It is the harder path to victory to go out there and say, I'm going to get in a kickboxing battle with Alex Pereira. It's not the smartest game plan. I mean, not only is it not the smartest, it's a very dumb game plan. And he could still win, but he's just making it very, very hard on himself. Alex Pereira's run in the UFC has been crazy impressive. He's knocked out 3 champions, Israel Adesanya, Yuri Prochazka, Sean Strickland. He also outstruck Jan Blachowicz in their 3-rounder. I know Pereira is hittable. I know Jamahal Hill has that power, but Pereira is so much more technical. I think he's going to chew up Jamahal Hill's legs. We also have Jamahal Hill coming off of an Achilles injury. Seems like a pretty quick turnaround, so that's also something we have to factor in here. Who knows if Jamahal Hill is the same Jamahal Hill that we saw fight Glover Teixeira? I'd actually imagine he's probably not. Even if he's healthy physically, he hasn't been able to improve, over that stretch where he was out, not able to train. So I'm going to go with Alex Pereira round 1 knockout. If I don't think Jamahal Hill is going to fight with a super smart game plan, with how dangerous Alex Pereira is, it's hard for me to pick against him. So I'm going to go with a round 1 Alex Pereira knockout. And that's going to wrap it up for every single matchup here on UFC 300. Let me know your guys' thoughts. Who do you have in the main event, the co-main, Holloway, Gaethje? Let me know down below. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Going to continue putting out content leading up to 300 and then in the week after, recapping that card. So thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.